This week has been a roller coaster of political chaos, executive overreach, and constitutional crises that would make James Madison's powdered wig fall right off his head. Before we go into our main focus, let's quickly recap a bit of the avalanche of news that's buried us all this past week. And remember, you can keep up with all the chaos at 47watch.com. And remember when national security was conducted through proper channels instead of group chats? Well, those days are apparently over. And what's being called SignalGate, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz accidentally added Jeffrey Goldberg, editor of The Atlantic, to a Signal group chat called Houthi PC Small Group. And this wasn't just any chat, it included Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and other top security officials discussing actual war plans against Houthi rebels in Yemen. Now, these officials weren't sharing memes. They were sharing military targets, weapons packages, and precise strike times. So when Defense Secretary Hegseth messaged that bombs would fall at exactly 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time, they did. And Goldberg watched it all unfold from a supermarket parking lot. The breach has alarmed U.S. allies, with NATO members and partners like Japan questioning intelligence sharing with Washington. And adding to the digital security nightmare, it was discovered that National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and other top officials, including White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, had left their Venmo friend list public, exposing sensitive personal and professional connections. The carelessness revealed links to journalists, defense contractors, and members of that now infamous Signal chat. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has been busy dismantling various government and independent agencies. The U.S. Institute of Peace staff received termination notices effective immediately, with the majority of employees let go as part of efforts to freeze funding and dismantle the organization. Now, this happened the same day the administration formally shut down U.S. aid. In health news, Peter Marks, the FDA's top vaccine regulator and the man who oversaw COVID-19 vaccine development, was forced out after refusing to support misinformation about vaccines promoted by Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Speaking of RFK Jr., he's also planning to eliminate an additional 10,000 positions at the Health and Human Services, which would shrink the agency staff by roughly 25%. The National Institutes of Health abruptly canceled all Recover program grants for long COVID research, halting nearly completed studies aimed at uncovering the condition's biological mechanisms. Researchers warn that these cuts waste millions in taxpayer dollars and could cripple future treatment efforts. And I'm not going to lie, folks, this one really hit a bit too close to home for me. The CDC was also ordered to bury a measles forecast that stressed the need for vaccinations instead issuing a statement saying the decision to vaccinate is a personal one. On the immigration front, hundreds of international students received emails instructing them to self-deport due to campus activism or social media posts deemed anti-American. Families of detainees at Chrome Detention Center in Miami are speaking out about harsh conditions, including lack of food, water, and medical attention, with viral videos showing people sleeping on floors. And I don't think any of us will ever forget the surveillance camera recording of a Fulbright scholar being abducted in broad daylight by a team of plainclothes ICE agents who pretended to be police officers. In other administration news, the Labor Department announced collective bargaining, that is, unions, would end at the national security agencies. And we saw continued fallout from the executive order making the District of Columbia safe and beautiful. The president even clarified on social media that he'll work with the mayor on this, and if it does not happen, we'll have no choice but to do it myself. For a guy that cares a lot about proper use of pronouns, that's a really odd way of phrasing things. But the story that deserves our full attention, a story that's been overshadowed by the signal and deportation disasters, is potentially even more alarming for the future of our democracy. This past Tuesday, House Speaker Mike Johnson made a statement that should send chills down the spine of anyone who passed eighth grade civics. When asked about how Congress might respond to federal judges blocking President Trump's executive orders, Johnson casually suggested, they might just eliminate entire courts. We do have the authority over federal courts, as you know. We can eliminate an entire district court, Johnson told reporters. We have power of funding over the courts and all those other things. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and Congress is going to act. Okay, let's just pause. and consider what just happened. The Speaker of the House, the person second in line to the presidency, just threatened to eliminate parts of the judicial branch because they're doing their constitutionally mandated job, providing checks and balances on executive power. So, how do we get here? Well, the trigger for this most recent constitutional crisis appears to be frustration over at least 15 nationwide injunctions issued by federal judges against Trump's executive orders. These include blocking deportations under the Alien Enemies Act, attempts to abolish birthright citizenship, dismiss federal employees, and halt certain federal expenditures. In particular, U.S. District Judge James Boasberg in Washington has been a target after he mandated the administration cease removing Venezuelan migrants. Trump has explicitly called for Boasberg's impeachment, a move that received a rare rebuke from Chief Justice John Roberts, who stated, "Impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement regarding a judicial decision." Johnson, who previously practiced constitutional law, later attempted to downplay his comments, saying he was merely demonstrating that Congress has extensive authority over the establishment, upkeep, and regulation of the courts. And technically, he's not entirely wrong. The Constitution's Article 3 established the Supreme Court while granting Congress the ability to ordain and establish lower federal courts. And yes, Congress has eliminated courts before. In 1913, it abolished the Commerce Court, redistributing its judges to the Federal Appeals Court. But there's a vast difference between reorganizing the court system for efficiency reasons and eliminating courts because you don't like their rulings. As Democratic Representative Jamie Raskin put it, the proper response to disagreement with a particular court ruling is not to abolish the court. That's obviously a naked assault on judicial independence. So what's the actual strategy here? Johnson has indicated that the House Judiciary Committee, chaired by Representative Jim Jordan, will hold a hearing this week to bring attention to the abuses. And additionally, the House plans to vote on a bill proposed by Representative Darrell Issa aimed at prohibiting district court judges from issuing nationwide injunctions. And alongside these legislative efforts, conservative members of the House have submitted impeachment resolutions against 6 judges who have obstructed actions taken by Trump and the Department of Government Efficiency. Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer called the threat outrageous, saying it is outrageous to even think of defunding the courts. The courts are the bulwark against Trump, and the Republicans can't stand it. And as you can see, the Democrats are very, very cross. Even if Johnson wanted to follow through on his threat, it would, in theory, face some significant hurdles. Republicans would need to convince appropriators to remove funding for specific courts from the Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill. And with their slim majority, House Republicans will require nearly unanimous consent to pass such a bill. That's a pretty tall order given the divisive nature of this particular move. Senate approval would be even more difficult, requiring at least 7 Democrats to join Republicans to overcome a filibuster, and that is not likely at all. And even some Republicans might oppose such measures. Senator Josh Hawley, the running man from the Capitol riot, expressed concern that the abolishing district courts would lead to huge backlogs and limit Republican judicial appointments. This attack on the judiciary is not happening in isolation. It's part of a broader pattern of challenging constitutional guardrails. Trump has instructed Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate ways to penalize law firms and lawyers who file what he deems to be frivolous lawsuits against the federal government. Executive orders targeting law firms like Jenner & Block and WilmerHale restrict their access to government work and suspend security clearances for their lawyers. The administration has demonstrated a willingness to ignore judicial rulings, such as deliberately defying Judge Boasberg's order to turn back deportation flights carrying Venezuelan immigrants. So in this context, William R. Bay, president of the American Bar Association, was not exaggerating when he said back in February, "These are not ordinary times. The rule of law itself is at stake." So while we've all been distracted by national security officials accidentally adding journalists to their war planning group chats, something far more fundamental to our democracy has been quietly unfolding. When the Speaker of the House casually suggests eliminating courts that don't rule in the president's favor, we're no longer talking about normal political disagreements. We're talking about dismantling the very system of checks and balances that has defined the American democracy for nearly 250 years. Now, look, the courts aren't perfect. No institution is. But they exist precisely because the founders understood that unchecked power inevitably leads to tyranny. When Madison, Hamilton, and the rest designed our system, they didn't create three branches of government because they thought it would be efficient. They did it because they knew it was necessary to preserve liberty. So the next time you hear someone suggest that we should just get rid of the courts that issue inconvenient rulings, remember what's really at stake. It's not about efficiency or even about specific policies. It's about whether we still believe in the fundamental principle that no one, not even a president, should be above the law. Because a democracy where courts are optional isn't really a democracy at all. It's something else entirely. And history has plenty of names for it, and none of them are good. This is 47 Watch. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.